Good afternoon. My name is Kees Vollaard. I'm an independent consultant and managing director of Industrial Island. At Industrial Island, I help energy companies tackle the toughest well intervention and abandonment challenges. We know projects can stall when risk, cost, and supply chain aren't aligned. Our value engineering approach enables operators, contractors to deliver safer, faster, and more cost-effective results while still protecting long-term value. Whether that's through services like consultancy, project management, or interim leadership, our goal is the same: simplify complexity and ensure projects move forward with value realized. I'm delighted to be your host for the OGV Energy Live this afternoon on the theme of drilling and wells. OGV Live is an interactive show which brings the news and insights from the energy sector to life through the UK leading energy industry publication, OGV Energy magazine. This month, we are delighted to invite a number of expert guests to this show to discuss some of the key topics in this space. And we're delighted to welcome Pauline Innes, Supply Chain Director of the NSTA, Mark Wilson, HSC and Operations Director, Mike Adams, CEO at Elemental Energies, Kevin Giles, Senior Commercial Manager at Wellveen, Nick Simister, General Manager at Cavitas, and Joe McGregor, founder of McGregor Consultants. So it's great to have you here. We're going to start off with Paul and Mark. There's been a bit of a buzz around Aberdeen lately. So the Dons bring home silverware after a long time. The tall ships are back since '97. So the granite apparently starts to sparkle again as well. So it's not just here. We see on the other side of the pond in Norway that licensing is being opened up again. So there's a lot of things to talk about. So Mark and Pauline, just with Norway pressing ahead with the licensing, well, here in the UK still having a mission to fulfill with respect to delivering energy and abandoning our assets. Supply chain is at the heart of this mission critical supply chain. So without we can't deliver this. How can we ensure that we have this resilient supply chain and the capability to deliver those products until 2050? Pauline, maybe if I start with you on that, what's your view on that?
Yeah, thanks, Kees. And I have to say, before I jump in to answer your question, I'm loving the reflection on Aberdeen being a city that sparkles. I am old enough to remember when the Aberdeen football team were at the height of their game, and it is lovely that the community of Aberdeen comes together around events like that. And I think sometimes events like this that OGV are hosting today are another great example of kind of keeping that community spirit going, indeed around the kind of drilling and abandonment kind of topics. But to jump to your question about supply chain resilience, I mean, for me, there's no doubt that the UK has a world-leading supply chain that's been built on decades of experience and activity. At the NSTA, through our kind of day-to-day job, we engage with the supply chain on a regular basis. And for the last couple of years, we've actually had a programme of engagement with the drilling community in particular. And there's no escaping the fact that times are difficult at the moment, and that the supply chain is definitely struggling. When we ask them what is it that you want and what is it you need, they often kind of cite just two simple things. They say, we need work to be visible and we need certainty that it's going to be delivered in accordance with that visibility that we're seeing. So that's why in the NSTA we've invested in tools like our Energy Pathfinder and our Twist databases and various tools to kind of show the supply chain just this range of opportunities that are currently available. And even if you go on today onto the Energy Pathfinder, you'll see there are several tender and well decommissioning and drilling opportunities actually. But the certainty topic, I think, is really important in this space. And for me, there's no doubt that the supply chain lacks confidence that the work that we are showcasing and making visible will be delivered as per the schedule. So I think for me, what needs to happen is that we need to rebuild that confidence. And I think the way that we rebuild that confidence is by seeing an uptick in contract awards. We've done quite a lot in this space, and particularly in relation to plug-in and abandonment, and I'm sure we'll come on to that in our conversation today. But for there, I'll stop. So for me, it's a simple thing, easy to say, and hard to do. And I suspect you'll ask me some questions on that in due course. But it's about rebuilding that confidence, and that's about more contracts.
Mark?
Perfect. No, thank you. Thank you. It's a great opportunity to be here today. And as you can tell, my accent is not from Aberdeen, although I was actually educated in Aberdeen. I remember the day, actually, like Pauline, when I lived in Bridgerdon, not too far from the professional footballer players of Aberdeen. I certainly wouldn't be able to afford to live in their area nowadays, of course. But yeah, I mean, there's some overlaps with what I sort of say. But when you link back to what you sort of opened up there with Case around the Aberdeen, the Granite City, and the confidence that we've got in it, that links directly to, map that across to the energy industry. And, the supply chain need confidence, as Pauline mentions there, but that confidence needs to turn into commitment and trust. And that commitment comes from a wide range of stakeholders, not just from operators, developers. It comes from local councils. It comes from the members in Parliament. Both comes from members of the Scottish Parliament, and regulators as well. We recognise that from an oil and gas perspective. Let's just focus on that right now, given that we're talking about drilling and wells. There's the Climate Change Committee mentioned 13 to 15 billion barrels of oil equivalent. That's the demand out to 2050. And we've got in the region, depends on where you read it, we've got the potential, the opportunity to have anywhere between 4 billion and 7.5 billion barrels of oil equivalent produced from domestic oil and gas production. So we've got to get as much commitment as we can to maximize that production. That'll give confidence not just to operators and developers, but to the supply chain, that world-class supply chain that has been ingrained within the UK for the last 50 and 60 years. And indeed, we say it many times, but wherever you go around the world, where there is oil and gas, where there is energy in terms of that commodity, you will hear a British accent, normally a Scottish accent, if we were to be true to it as well. So we just got to make sure that, as Pauline says, we've got that confidence in what's coming forward. We've got the commitment from a wide range of stakeholders, and that will build trust. That will build investment opportunities. And there's some areas that I'm sure we'll talk to, both at the sort of that operational level about what we're doing around sort of well activity, but also that strategic level when we talk about licensing and that investment landscape as well. But fundamentally, that's where I see the opportunities rest.
Thanks for that. And we will be speaking later on with some leaders in the supply chain, talking about these things. But if we just focus on the point of trust, we have a mission till 2050 and beyond. That won't be with me because I'm middle-aged, grey, and old. So what are we doing to get more people interested in our industry and actually retain them as well? Mark, if you kick off, you were the last one.
Very happy with that. I mean, there's a number of initiatives that are taking place across the sort of the realm. But let's just focus, I guess, if we focus on adult learners, we go to school learners as well, of course, in there. But from an adult perspective, different opportunities, whether it be the skills passport, whether it be promoting activities through such things as student rooms. We've got our decommissioning conference coming up at the end of November, where we have a student room, and we encourage individuals students that are emerging now to look at opportunities within the energy landscape. Look at the exciting opportunities that we're in decommissioning for the future. We haven't got 1 year's worth of decommissioning. We've got multi-decades worth of decommissioning to come upon. So it's about really flagshipping this industry as a positive and being proud of it. I mean, I've been in this industry for 14 years. Prior to that, I had 25 years in the military. I was proud of my service in the military, but I'm equally as proud of what I've done within the energy industry and what we collectively do. We've got to make sure that we promote and flagship that. But when people talk about oil and gas being this subject that we don't want to get people working into. We've got to promote it as the positive as it is, as part of the energy transition. Oil and gas will enable the wider renewable, that wider energy transition to go to 2050. But we've got to do it in a programmed way. In the same way, we can't have people just leaving the oil and gas industry to go work in renewables. It's got to be planned, programmed, and make sure that we've got the skill transfer, because not everybody will want to go. I like you, won't be working in 2050, but I've got a 9-year-old son that will be, and I want to encourage that individual, as an engineer hopefully, or whatever trade, commercial background, etc., to actually move into the energy industry, whatever it looks like then. But we right now have got a pivotal role to play in what that future looks like for that generation.
I don't know if I can top that, Mark. You've given that's a brilliant and passionate demonstration of, I think, what this industry has to offer. And for me, that becomes the sales pitch, doesn't it? It's an energy sector with a long-term future, with diverse opportunities across a range of competencies and a range of skills, and it's here for the long term, and it's adding huge value. That the passion that Mark's just shown, I think, is the bit that will keep people there. It is a hard debate. It is a hard conversation to have. But I think that all that we can do is lean into the things that we're already doing and just demonstrating that passion and commitment, keeping going with our STEM initiatives, with all the kind of things that Mark's just highlighted, and just keeping the faith and keeping the conversation live. That, I think, will be what continues to attract young people in.
And I think just to add there, Paul, because you really sort of had a thought in my mind there as well. It's about keeping it relevant as well. What is relevant to us on this call today is not going to be relevant to an 18 to 20-year-old necessarily. We've got to make sure that we promote and we market this industry accordingly. What will offshore Europe look like for those apprentices that are coming through? What is it they're looking to see and hear when they go there as well? Many stands, the OE UK stand, for instance, we're going to have some Lego on there because we recognise that's a draw and it's a drag, particularly for me. Dare I say, at my age, I love Lego. But it's just making sure that we keep that conversation relevant as well.
Those are great points, and I will say is when I entered the industry, what attracted me was the challenge. And if I just look at the well abandonment, that's a true engineering challenge. That is really where your wits are needed. So it's I think we can offer a challenging prospect, so to speak. And saying that is, I will also be bringing my son to offshore Europe. He's only 10, but it's he's an interesting being engineer. I'm just going to see and look at some of the questions that are being popped up. One is regarding late payments. Mark, this is probably in your wheelhouse there. There seems to be payment terms being exceeded over the 30 days. So what's happening on that from an offshore energy point of view in order to address that?
I think Pauline could probably jump in as well here, but fundamentally on this area as well, without going into the specifics, what we do across the supply chain and across the operator community, including across the industry, is we do continue to sort of promote the supply chain principles, and that individuals and organizations recognize, particularly for SMEs, for instance, where that cash flow is important, that they get it within the T's and C's, and that they honor and respect that. And we continue to do that. We've got a number of supply chain forums, a number of supply chain groupings there. So please do reach out to the OE UK supply chain team if you've got a conversation you want to have. I know, Pauline, you've got a view, I guess, from the stewardship survey aspect as well. So I'll just pass to you if I may, Pauline.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So NST and OE UK work really hand in glove on this, and so we fully endorse and support the OE UK supply chain principles, and that kind of prompt payment is a critical part that makes the system work. If the money doesn't flow through the system, then the SME sector fails, and that is not a success for on any level, and it's not something that any of us want. So as part of the work that we do, we hold operators to account on this. We meet with them on an annual basis and go through, we look at their performance, we look at how promptly they pay, and we have conversations and challenge those who are not properly. Beyond that, we've also started to have that discussion with tier one contractors, because I guess, in fairness to the operators, the operating community are pretty good at making those payments. Not everybody, not everywhere, not all the time, but generally speaking. But it's about, for us, it's about kind of embedding those principles and good practice throughout the supply chain. So we've started conversations with tier one contractors on the same basis. And so there's a little bit of holding to account. But we've also been really happy to support OEUK and the kind of the awards that they do, kind of recognising good performance is an important part of it as well. So kind of gold, silver awards for good practice in this space that OEUK run each year at their share fair are an important part of the picture as well.
Oh, thank you for that. Maybe just moving on slightly different. If we talk about innovation, so it's one of the levers in order to drive the cost down, both in intervention and in well abandonment. Is there one area that you're seeing that the supply chain is really picking this up and moving that forward at pace? Pauline?
So I guess that my colleagues who work in kind of technology and innovation teams in the NSTA would say to me, the supply chain is always at the cutting edge of innovation and is continually driving things forward. So whether that is through the introduction of new technologies or new innovative systems and processes. So, for example, we have embraced and endorsed the kind of the concept of campaigning and well decommissioning in particular, but I mean, it's a collaboration that works for well intervention and drilling as well, I'm sure. But and part of the innovation and models around how you would make that work have come from the supply chain. And when you say, how do we build the solutions, very often it is the supply chain who has come forward with the examples and the ideas. So it's a really vibrant and active space. Part of the challenge is embedding them, but I think that I am comforted at seeing that kind of level of innovation. It hasn't diminished at all. And while Mark speaks, I'll switch my light back on if you give me a moment.
Maybe highlight the embedding of the innovation in that sense that Pauline is highlighting as a.
I think there's two areas. I mean, I think first and foremost, I mean, we are an industry of innovators. There's no ifs or buts about that. From what I've seen, is we're not sat back. Even though we're operating in many cases assets that are 40 years old, well beyond their sort of design life, we still continue to innovate. You see that through the wells and the drilling activity that we undertake, and the way that we do sort of such things as wireline wells intervention and stuff. But two areas I think we're sort of really demonstrating the innovation and moving it forward with more to do. Let's not recognise that. I'll put it up front. One is around the efforts that we're doing around decarbonisation, recognising that we've had a 28% reduction already. We're moving forward to see what zero routine flaring and venting looks like as we move towards 2030. And some operators are already actually at that stage of implementation, changing designs and innovating legacy assets so that they can be more less harmful to the environment through the release of methane. But the other area as well, as we move through the energy transition, is what we're doing with carbon capture and storage. And you look at that, sort of the way that we're innovating that. We've got a fantastic opportunities in the UK to store over 100 years worth of current emissions, 78 gigatons of CO2 we can store. And sort of it's those areas that we're sort of demonstrating as we contribute to those hard to abate industries across the UK, where this industry is demonstrating through innovation that it can support the wider decarbonisation of the UK, whilst also supporting the decarbonisation of current oil and gas production. And we've been seeing that 28% reduction since 2018. And more to come, of course, and we're not complacent around that. There is more action required and more action that will be done.
Thanks for that. If we now fast forward 5 years, what does success look like for the UKCS basin, in your view? And what can we do right now about it? Pauline, maybe your light is on.
I love this question, right? So, and I love it because that is the kind of the way my mind works. I kind of jump forward and say, what do I want it to look like? And then I work back and say, and how can I get there? So what do I want this to look like is, if I take, let me talk about drilling and decommissioning, and just because that's my double whammy in terms of my job description, but you could equally roll it out to anything that any of the innovations and new energy sectors that kind of Mark's just talked about. But for me, the win-win for all of us is that you have a market that works in harmony. So you have a developer or an operator or a contractor, a community that has projects and work that it puts to the marketplace. And when it puts to the marketplace, you have a competent, resourced market that's got capacity and capability to deliver at a competitive rate. So that is in an ideal world, it's that harmony, it's that market working in harmony. For me, that's an active supply chain, and again, if you stick to decommissioning, that's about an active rig market across the portfolio, and probably, if I jump 5 years ahead, doing a lot of work in P&A, certainly more than we're currently doing. Possibly, more into still investing in intervention and infill drilling or any other drilling that kind of can be available at that space as well. Also, a competent drilling supply chain that is actively looking at carbon injection wells. So for me, that across that energy transition portfolio, it's a system whereby there is money going into the system, there is work being delivered, there are employment opportunities, there are communities and societies around the UK that are continuing to have sustainable levels of employment and sustainable jobs, and we are delivering the energy sector that the UK needs.
Thank you, Pauline. Mark?
Yeah, I'll keep it very brief. I'm conscious there's more to come after us as well on this one. But yeah, I mean, it links in to what Pauline was said, but keep it very strategic around, what does the future look like in 2030? That's where the UK has positioned itself. So it's got a strong homegrown energy sector and energy landscape, that we're less reliant on imports. We imported 40% of our energy in 2023. We want to be moving away from that. And that homegrown energy sector allows greater UK contribution to the economy. It allows greater contribution to UK jobs, to the UK supply chain, builds a world-class export. What we need to do it right now, though, and these activities that we're engaged with right now, is we need a commitment to continued licensing. In some shape or form, we need some access to acreage, some access to keep the infrastructure pushing beyond the current day into that 2030 as well. We need some form of reform to the energy profit levy, and we're engaging on that aspect as well to see what that reform could look like. That will generate investment, which will allow us to deliver that 2030. And finally, we need to make sure that throughout it all, we're delivering with the supply chain, with other stakeholders, an energy strategy that links not just oil and gas, but those renewable sources as well. As you go through the energy transition, that supports growth for the future.
Thanks for that, Mark, and I would agree. So first of all, Pauline, you're absolutely right. Having that work that's visible and for the supply chain to look at, so they can build their capability. But saying that is, I'm a true believer in the sense that in order to deliver this, we need to have the right mix of drilling expertise, well intervention expertise, and abandonment expertise to deliver a world class. So thank you so much. We'll be speaking now to the critical supply chain in the next session, and we're going to have up Mike and Kevin.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So we just had Pauline and Mark, and we talked about the mission critical supply chain. So you as a representative of the mission critical supply chain, we touched on innovation, we touched on collaboration. And those are easy words to say, right? It's easy. We just need to innovate. We need to collaborate. But it's actually truly hard to deliver. From your perspective, and then maybe starting with you, Mike, what does genuine collaboration look like, and in real life?
Yeah, I think especially going back a number of years. I mean, going back over the past 10 years, how many times has that question been asked, and how many times have we been pushed as a supply chain to consider that as a critical part of the future health of the Northeast, especially when we're looking at late life into decommissioning? How do we manage that? And I've said it, time and time again, that it's easy to say, it's difficult to do, it's expensive to do. And I think that is what is often overlooked from, when we're looking in and seeing collaboration as a key to unlocking value, especially in decommissioning specifically. It's the cost of that. It takes a lot of time. It's a huge investment from the supply chain to collaborate. And one of the most important things, and the supply chain is collaborating, it's doing it really well, increasingly so, but you need that stable environment on which to invest in that collaboration. That's stable policy to allow decisions to be taken around campaigns, to allow work programs to feed out from that, to allow a supply chain to go, I'm going to invest real time and money to build, and this also goes for technology innovation as well, to build something that is going to have a real impact in that market. And I'm really passionate about what we have here in the UK and especially in the Northeast. And as much as we are mobile people and we have mobile technology that can be moved around the world, for it to be used here and for it to be growing here, we need that stability to allow us to invest in the collaboration that's needed to unlock value over the next decade or more.
Yeah, thanks. And you kind of echo what Pauline is saying. So having that stable workflow and visible workflow is kind of key in order to do that investment. Kevin, maybe from an innovation point of view, with Wellveen being an innovative company, what's your view?
Yeah, I think collaboration's an interesting word. Collaboration, I think, quite often is something that we think about between operators and service companies, whether they're tier one, etc. But quite often collaboration can be between service companies together, and I don't know if there's enough of that going on. I guess maybe around trust, around risk, contractual barriers, etc. Certainly from a collaboration point of view, Wellveen's been very lucky over a number of years now, where we've had multiple operators funding different projects in the last couple of years. We've even had one example where 2 operators collaborated with Wellveen on one particular technology as a partner, rather than as a supplier type arrangement. So we've been very lucky that way. But yeah, from moving on to the innovation side, innovation, I think, is obviously another buzzword we hear about and use all the time. And I think innovation is there. I think the supply chain, Mike just touched on it. Supply chain absolutely has innovation there. It's typically a funding issue and red tape. I think red tape is one of my biggest frustrations when we're going to talk about innovation to whether it be operators or to other service companies. This red tape around regulation, etc., etc. If I just touch back on, I think the Vice President of the US visited Paris recently in February, I think. He was talking about AI and he was talking about innovation there. And he was saying that regulation is killing innovation in that particular space. And I think we've got, to an extent, a small amount of regulation and red tape in the oil industry still stopping us innovating. It's not all about just the cash side of things.
Thanks for that. And when you talk about deploying new technology, is that changing? So when we worked together, it was a lengthy process to go from almost idea to field trial. Do you feel that's changing right now? Is there a reason for change, Kevin? Yeah,
I definitely think so. If you go back, say 10, 15 years, obviously you can see I'm of the vintage. I remember Aberdeen winning in the past as well. So a bit like Pauline in the past session. So if you think 15 years ago, I think most operators had a different approach to risk for innovation. They wanted to be second almost to run technology. And I think nowadays we're definitely seeing that that's changed for sure. I mean, there's always still room to grow, but I definitely see operators are moving in the right direction in that space.
Thanks for that. If we talk about change, and this is maybe my observation on it, I do see a change of, how you say, moving from an operator-led to almost a well management company-led industry. Mike, you're really at the forefront of this. Is there something you can expand on that?
I think ultimately there's a core of knowledge that's needed to engineer and deliver these big projects. And it's ultimately where that core sits. And traditionally that has sat within the operators, whether they are small or big. And And there have been varying degrees of where comfort has rested around which type of capabilities operators want to have in-house, but some of them have had absolutely everything. And they have been the driving force behind their projects. And I think that's definitely what we're seeing, is that shift of where does that knowledge sit really to deliver that. And it's the same with technology. I mean, technology was commonly developed within the operators by the operators. That shifted, I guess, a little bit quicker than some of those kind of core capabilities, but it's very much shifting. It is shifting into the supply chain, and we need a healthy supply chain to pick up that mantle and create those supportive environments to develop that capability. I mean, and the one risk I think that there is in that model is that what the operators have done so well historically is nurture that capability and invest in it, investing almost in R&D, but for the people. How do you develop those people and multi-skilled people? And I think if we look at the transition as well, there's a real challenge around the skills needed for different parts of the transition. I mean, specifically just touching on CCS for a minute, I think we have such a fantastic opportunity, given that a lot of the late life skills that are needed to manage something like the North Sea are critical to evaluating and furthering CCS projects. So there's a fantastic opportunity there, but wherever those skills are sitting has to be in that nurturing environment. And that needs to be built, and the supply chain needs to build that. And I think that's what we have been seeing, and Aberdeen's a fantastic place to kind of build that from. And we've started here, but we're also doing it in Norway. We're also doing it in Houston. There are fantastic places where those skills are, but they need to be in that environment that's going to invest in them and develop them, so that we can, as a supply chain, pick up that mantle, take more risk, and be that delivery partner that historically was in the operator's mantle.
Kevin, anything to add on that side from the supply chain taking on that innovation side, which is different than it was in the past?
Yeah, I agree with Mike. I think the supply chain is doing a great job taking that innovation on, that mantle on. However, it's a collaboration. I go back to that collaboration word. We can't do it alone. Obviously, well engineering companies like Elemental, the operators and ourselves really have to be working together on this. And I don't think we talk enough. I think I'd love to see more collaboration discussions, especially around challenges. I go back to a little war story that I was up in Alaska visiting a sales team in a previous company I worked for. And when I arrived that day, I was invited to go to an operator's morning call where we all as service companies sat in the room. And in the room, the operator stood up and said, well, I've got these wells went down. I've got these wells needing logged. I've got these wells challenges. Can you guys all come up with some ideas and put some proposals to me? And I think in that example, where you're seeing everyone in the room, everyone thinking about it, I might be able to work with him. I might be able to work with him. That collaborative environment was fantastic to hear. And I think we're really missing that a little bit here. And it wouldn't be difficult to do here in the North Sea to have that collaboration for innovation.
And I think it's the bringing together as well of there's many needs, when we're looking at these projects. And I think collaboration and unlocking value is one of those needs, and it is key. But there are also commercial needs, there's regulatory needs, they're all competing. And it's how we do bring all of those voices together so that we're making sure we're getting the best of all worlds, that the commercial model suits the innovation and the collaboration, which also suits those regulatory demands, which especially late life can be quite stringent in terms of timelines. So it's also pulling that wider view into it as well, which I think, as we, in late life and decom is more complex than in E&A.
I see a comment coming through on the chat as well, and that collaboration is working together to a common goal, right? Almost in that sense, and that truly resonates with me, because if I go back to the days I was on the rig floor, it didn't matter what kind of boiler suit you were wearing. We were all focused on making whole, so to speak, and I think that's the spirit, and to some extent getting that common goal. And I've seen now contracts in other places being awarded on a different basis. That it's that vested. We're in it all together. Everybody should win, and I think there's an opportunity there. Me personally, maybe Mike, on this contractually, do you see some changes happening in the market that contracts are bidded differently versus like a call off to longer term commitment to help with that development of people, that help with that innovation side?
Yeah, I guess just picking up on that, my last point there around that broader kind of group that needs, or the broader interest that need to kind of interact around the regulator, commercial contracts, and collaboration, technical and innovation. Quite often, the way that flows is there's regulatory demands and regulatory pressure. There's a supply chain trying to solve and innovate a solution, and then we get down and we roll up our sleeves and look at contracts and commercials. And that's ideally you're doing that in a more collaborative and kind of open process, where all of those things can kind of come together, and we're ultimately trying to get a holistic picture of how do we achieve what the regulator wants, using innovation to unlock value, and then capture that in a contract that supports it. I think one of the benefits around where we're at in the North Sea is we are just looking at quite a different horizon, and the work can be a little bit more predictable. There are large work scopes coming up that will be awarded in big chunks, which allow you to achieve some of that value, but it's about having the time to do it as well. I mean, it does take time to run through that and bring people together and go, right, this is how we're going to unlock value in this process. And you do need time, and you have to come around the table to do it. So I think, yes, we're lucky in that mature basin, there is going to be the opportunity for longer term contracts. But on the other side, we have to give ourselves time to make sure, as those contracts are sculpted, and as we kind of, or as the operators decide how they want to form that, they have enough space to go, right, this is how we're going to unlock value over what could be a 5 or a 10-year period.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin, anything to add on that subject?
Yeah, Mike, I would add to that I think service companies like ourselves, SMEs, obviously there's concerns at times when we see that we're becoming further away from operators. Obviously, larger contracts are starting to be pulled together towards the likes of Elemental. So there is obviously concern there, and the regulatory side is obviously an issue. I can't help but think that if you think of the old Crine and Logic schemes that came out in the 90s, where we were trying to, reduce waste and basically speed up contractual discussions. I just wonder if that's something that we should have potentially as a discussion in the North Sea here of how we take that success from that models and have almost like a commercial framework where we could remove all these ridiculous demands sometimes we see when service company to service companies work, or service companies to operator work, where you see demands for 180-day payments, and they want to own IP and they want to own all these other crazy things. And ultimately we all know the game is that starting points for the negotiation to bring back to where we all really want to be in the first place. So I don't know, I think there is some worry, I think, on the SMEs. We are starting to get slightly further away from operators with some of these larger contracts. However, to answer your question, Case, on are we seeing a contractual change, I think, yes, it's probably for the good, because we're seeing longer term contracts, I think, going to be awarded and being awarded just recently. It's not so much these mini bids we used to hear of that were just for one well here and one well there, which were, let's be honest, completely useless to the supply chain. That didn't bring any value and didn't attract investment at all. So,
no, thank you so much. We are going to go to the next session. The one thing I will say is in my mind, the only way we can do this is together. So together is the only way we can succeed, and that's not just operator, not well management or supply chain. We all need to do it. That's what I truly believe. Thank you so much, and we're heading to the final session. Hi, Joe.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, great to have you on. So we talked a lot about technology. We talked about people.
Yep.
So technology that pushes the boundaries, but you need people to run it.
Absolutely.
So from your point of view, Joe, being very much in the people what is happening right now, maybe in the UK and abroad? What's new? What skills are needed? Lots of questions, but I'm pretty sure you have the answers.
Yeah, I mean, it's still an exciting time in the drilling and wells arena. We're lucky. Interestingly, we've been involved in a project, still are actually, drilling for polyhalite, which is fertilizer in the UK. Very interesting, something different. Also, lithium in Europe. There's hydrogen in Africa, geothermal, of course. Nuclear waste is another one that's coming up. Very long-term project. Disposal of nuclear waste, a lot of drilling involved. So although traditional skills are involved, it just shows, I think, the diversity of the drilling arena itself and what can be done. We work with obviously engineers, operationally, planning phase, within that, the materials and logistics side of things, the costs, HSC, etc., in the whole arena. So there's still a demand, definitely, for people, albeit not quite as much as we have seen in the past.
Thank you so much, Joe. Nick, if I go back to technology, and Cavitas very much being an innovative company in that sense. Listening maybe to the previous conversation, is there anything you would like to add to that side of it with regards to getting a product from idea to actually field test? Is there any hurdles, any barriers that you see in that space?
Yeah, well, I mean, so our technology, for some of the listeners who won't know, is essentially a downhole heater. So it's there to increase production and therefore potentially extend field life, which is obviously a big one, encouraging more drilling. But what we found is because predominantly it was for heavy oil, we developed it for the Bentleys and the Bresses of the North Sea. But unfortunately, because of the lead time to get those kind of fields off the ground, we ended up internationalizing before we came back to the UK. So, I mean, it's certainly something that we initially hoped to be using in the UK, and then we've internationalized it, and now we're hoping that now it's a more established product, we can bring it back. But something that we found really valuable was, at the time, it was the OGTC, it's now the NZTC. We had support from them for getting that product off the ground. I think that's something that's kind of crucial for your really small companies like we were initially, to be able to have that pathway, have those kind of connections with operators. I think the more of that we can do, the more support we can give to bodies like the NZTC, the kind of better the technological development in the North Sea will be. And then obviously from that, more drilling, more people employed, longer term contracts, and all the great things that brings.
No, thanks for that. And maybe just to follow up on that, in the old days, and this is maybe where the grey hair started talking, we used to have great capabilities in the Bridge of Dawn to do test wells, test runs on that. I understand we now go further afield, even down to Canada to get things tested. What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, well, our office is actually just across from the old Weatherford site. So we were here when that was getting brought down, which was obviously a sad sight to see. But in some ways, the kind of transition in action, because that's coming down, and out my window, I can see one of the windmills turning at the same time. So we kind of have those things together. But yeah, it's definitely a major thing that we have as a challenge, is having things like test loops in Aberdeen itself. I mean, like we have a hydrogen project coming up based out of France, and we wanted to do a factory acceptance test in Aberdeen for them, and our assumption was, oh well, that'll be easy. So we reached out to some of the tier 1 service companies. Oh no, we're shutting down those facilities, we're not doing them anymore, we don't do that kind of thing in the North Sea anymore. So we're probably going to have to do what we've done with other jobs, which is Houston, which is kind of crazy when we're based in Aberdeen, they're based in Paris, and I mean, there are some in England, but not to the same kind of scope that we need. And so, yeah, it's
but maybe if there's people on this call, feel free to contact Nick if there's a follow-up or anything, because I do believe we need to support our local economy here in the UK. Joe, maybe flipping back to the people side, and
Yeah.
we talked maybe the longer term contracts. How much would that change your business? Maybe with, how you say, going above and beyond, and to improve on the people side. Is there anything reflection you can give on that?
Yeah, I think it makes a huge difference to people's personal, other than working from one project to the next and waiting for the next project to start. We deal with a lot of companies internationally. However, they're UK based, London based, for example. So there's opportunity for people, hybrid working now. You can, rather than just being based in Aberdeen, you can work in London offices part of the time, potentially longer term projects internationally as well from a planning perspective. So there's lots of opportunities, I think, out there for people in Aberdeen. And I think it's really important to have a lot of positivity during these times at the moment. And, let people be aware of what opportunities there are coming up. It's still an exciting, vibrant industry, and there is still demand for sure.
And what are the typical skills at the moment in demand, sir?
Well,
I was just going to slightly build on that. I was just going to say, obviously, from longer term contracts, you've obviously got the training that can come from that, and that's obviously something that a lot of companies like Joe can build into and get value from as well. Whereas if they're only short term, you can't really prepare for training the next generation.
Yeah.
Sorry, Joe.
No, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Yeah, no, absolutely agree with you. A lot of people are exiting the industry, as you know. A lot of experience we're losing, unfortunately. Mentors, just simply through time to retire, actually. So it's, being able to encourage people into the industry as well is hugely important.
Maybe flipping back to Nick, extending the field life and pushing the COP further down. What has been the uptake outside of the UK on your technology? Has that been game changing for some of the assets?
Yeah, well, it's kind of fascinating. It wasn't really our initial intent, to be honest, but what we found because we kind of speak to a lot of clients globally, is they have assets that they maybe drilled decades ago and essentially have left them stranded because they're too challenging to develop with the technology that existed at the time. And so we're talking to a lot of, especially national oil companies, where they're saying, okay, we could use this to develop these fields, and some of the fields are multi-billion barrel assets. And so that's obviously hugely important on the greenfield site, and then obviously the infill drilling on old assets that they might be looking at new areas for. And from my point of view, like I said, we had originally developed this for those kind of heavy oil fields. It can also be used for kind of waxy oil fields. I know a lot of fields have been shut in the North Sea because of wax problems that haven't been developed, and with the current regulatory system, unfortunately, might never be developed. And yet, with the right technologies, that could add kind of significant amounts of drilling, significant amount of activity, which in turn, people. Some of the kind of famous ones, for want of a better word, your Bentleys and your Bresses are there. But there's also stuff in the Murray Firth that's huge assets that have maybe had a well drilled in or a bit of seismic, but they're there and they could be developed, and that could significantly help achieve that. I think it was 4.5 billion barrels that was discussed at kind of the start of the call. These are all hundreds of millions, if not billions of barrel assets. And it's obviously from an oil and gas point of view, it's crazy to leave them in the ground. But unfortunately, we need to have that collaboration and that kind of uptake of new technologies in order to achieve that.
No, absolutely. I can fully agree. And I used to work in an oil field in California at Kern River, and that was discovered in 1893, if I'm correct. So that's been on the go for more than 100 years, just by technology, like what your company is providing. So when Offshore Energies UK is talking about and the transition authorities, we need to go to 2050. What do we need to do to get ready for that, Joe? Is there one thing that we need to do right now in order to be ready for 2050?
Yeah, keep drilling, you know, and encourage people into the industry, you know. Without that, you know, where do they come from? You know, where's, you know, bring back the excitement. It's such a fun, vibrant, it's exciting industry. And opportunities, we need opportunities for people. You know, encouraging that. You know, for example, there's a company that's actually London-based at the moment. They're going to be a very long-term project internationally, and they're opening an office in Aberdeen. How wonderful! You know, they're investing a lot of money in the city, and you know, there's opportunities there for people going forward, and making sure people are aware of these things. You know,
Nick, from your point of view?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think from my side, on the especially on the people front, it's unfortunately a perception. So the perception of the oil and gas industry has historically been that it isn't the best. Let's be honest. There's been an element of it's still seen today as a relatively dirty industry, but huge strides have been made with that. Obviously, we've got things like stopping flaring, we've got electrification of rigs, we've got the CCS that we're looking at. And I think the more that we can get that communicated to people and who are outside the industry, I know that a lot of people are working very hard on that, but it's something that needs to be really kind of dialed in on more and more and more. The more the kind of general members of the public and potentially people joining the industry might be interested in it. And I mean, that also feeds into the political landscape. There's no getting away from the fact that if it was a vote winner for the government to approve Rosebank, for example, then it would have been done at the drop of a hat. But because it's seen as a potential political hot potato, it's been kind of pushed back and forth. And the more we can make that kind of communication and get people to realize that we're doing important work and also in a clean and green way, then the better, from my point of view.
Maybe if we go to the chat, there's a question there. How can we keep them in Aberdeen? They can go on a plane, but it's how can we keep them in Aberdeen? Joe?
It's a tough.
yeah, I think you can keep it in Aberdeen. I think if we work together with other companies in the UK, and I think, you know, hybrid working and things, I think we can keep, absolutely, you know, I think it's keeping the expertise in the UK is really important, as well as keep it in Aberdeen and not losing people internationally, and being able to work on projects that are from UK-based organizations and allowing the hybrid work to continue. And the supply chain is still very much in Aberdeen. And the company I just mentioned, the reason they're opening an office in Aberdeen, which they hadn't intended to initially because they're London-based, is to access the supply chain direct. So,
Nick?
Yeah. And I mean, just to kind of build on that as well, going back to the previous session, it has to be about collaboration. Like, there's still a huge amount of people working in Aberdeen in these areas with a huge amount of expertise. And the vast majority of people, I think, like to speak to people in person. They kind of bounce ideas off them a lot better. And then, so the more events that we can have, obviously things like Offshore Europe, fantastic, but the more events that we can have where people in Aberdeen, where people are talking to other people and kind of bouncing ideas off each other, the more interest that there'll be. Because, yeah, I mean, technically you could have it literally anywhere in the world, but if everything is done remotely and there's nothing in person, then you don't always get quite the same kind of level of collaboration and the same kind of level of inventiveness. And also, certainly from a London point of view, the property is a lot cheaper up here, so that's going to be a draw for some companies and people.
Yeah, and I will say from a personal point of view is I work a lot remote, and it does make it easier to do a workshop in the Far East early on, and then drop off my son at school here in Cults Academy. So it's there are benefits to that side, but I do take your point that sometimes face to face is better, Nick. What would you change? What does need to change? We talked about the fiscal side, but beyond that, is there anything else that on a people side that seems to be a barrier to this?
I think that it's education. I think, and young people being aware, like Nick said earlier on, that we have this bad reputation. It's trying to get some more industry leaders that are able to be more present, in the UK on news discussions or channels, and have those debates and clear our name as such.
And I mean, certainly from a technology kind of viewpoint, it's probably, and I mean, it was mentioned in the last section that the kind of risk operators becoming slightly less risk averse on new technologies. But I mean, that there's certainly a long road to be had there with regard to kind of speed of uptake. You're still kind of looking at kind of multi-year for kind of technology approvals. And I think from our side, certainly, if that could be sped up, and obviously I understand people don't want to take risks because there's the potential if it doesn't work, then they're set in a bad light, and in very extreme cases, they might even lose their jobs if they're the ones in an operator or a service company that have approved it. But if we continue on the current trajectory, there's unfortunately only one way that we're going, whereas if we can adopt new technologies more aggressively, then that can obviously improve, certainly on the renewable side and the transition side of things and the production increase side of things. And that is only going to improve the perception of the industry. And also, with the best will in the world, how Aberdeen's perceived as well. And that will attract more kind of companies and talent up here.
Yeah, and I think you're saying something quite important in that sense. Potentially just the lack of taking the risk in that sense, right? So if I look at the software as a service industry, they're quite happy going from an MVP 1 to an MVP 2, while in the oil and gas it seems to be a lot longer trajectory to get to things deployed. So I think there's learnings that we as an industry can have from other sides, and saying that on the people side, and looking at Joe on this. So somebody took a punt on me 25 years ago as a green heart at offshore. I do think personally we sometimes just need to take that punt. Joe?
Sorry, I've got a bit of interference here. Completely agree with you. I mean, I remember, 25, 30 years ago, a young engineer would come in the office and you really liked them. They had a great personality, because that's so important as well as technical ability, to fit in somewhere and getting to know people. And our clients do respect us and our knowledge, and, the fact that we can introduce them to people and say, please have a conversation with them, because they're actually knowledge, they're intelligent, they're knowledgeable, however their personality would fit in your organization. Things like, we have a beer and wine fridge still in our office. We're quite old school. We want people to come in. We want collaboration, Nick, like you're saying. People pop in, have a chat, talk about things, in a relaxed environment. And it's really important that, that we can encourage that. Have more events, like you say, but more relaxed, so we can talk about these things and encourage young people to come along. One of the members of our team is on the committee for the Energy Institute Young Professionals. And that's really important, because she waving the banner for us as well, as an industry, and on the drilling and wells side in particular.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's crucial, that keyword of like relaxed. I mean, if people don't feel comfortable at an event, they're probably just going to speak to the two people that they knew when they went there, and nothing's really going to collaborate at all. You don't necessarily need to be on the wine to speak to other people, but certainly a relaxed environment can help that kind of people open up, who, especially, let's be honest, a lot of the time on the engineering side, aren't necessarily the most extroverted, but can, if they feel comfortable, then they can certainly be more likely to want to share and discuss and collaborate.
No, thank you so much and for your insights, and thanking all the guests as well who've been speaking. I hope this has been useful for the people listening in. So that wraps up this month's OGV Live on the subject of drilling and wells, which has been a fantastic insight on some of the key themes affecting the industry, especially at this time of change and evolution in the energy sector. Thank you again to all the guests, and I look forward to speaking to you again next month when we will be discussing the key themes relating to digital transformation. Thank you so much.